South African markets closed in the green yesterday with the rand trading stronger against the dollar. That's as investments cheered the re-election of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was inaugurated yesterday. Let's continue reacting to this. Bring in Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix. That's Dr. Azar Jammine, who joins us now via our video link. Dr. Jammine, great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time. We've been here before, haven't we? I mean, at the time when the current president was first elected, we know there was a term being thrown around of Ramphosa, the markets being very receptive of the personhood of Cyril Ramaphosa as he takes up that position. And we know how time has fared since then. And so I suppose the obvious, perhaps even elementary question to ask now is, how long do you reckon this will last?
It's very difficult to say how long this will last. Firstly, I need to put it into perspective. The extent to which the rand has gained on this occasion is very tiny compared with what it was experienced after Ramaphosa was first elected and Ramphosa took over. At that time, the rand went from 14 to 11.50 over a fairly short period of time. We've come from a low point of around 1880 at the worst point after the elections now to 18 rand to the dollar. That's a much smaller appreciation. So the extent of the euphoria that we've seen so far has been far more muted than that which we encountered in 2018. Nonetheless, you are quite correct to ask how long is this going to last for. One is indeed aware of the fact that there is huge pushback from leftist parties against the notion of a tie-up between the ANC and the DA, and there have been rumors for that I think from fairly reliable sources that even within the DA there is a lot of pushback against, even within the ANC there's a lot of pushback against the idea of a tie-up with the DA, most notably the tripartite alliance partners, COSATU and the SACP, are very frightened that the DA's stance against minimum wage legislation and against black economic empowerment could actually reverberate to their detriment. But we've got to wait to see. We've got to wait to see what the responses are of the various parties within the GNU to how the divergences that exist between their policies, especially at a microeconomic level, do pan out, and whether there's any spirit of compromise between them. The fundamental principle of sanctity of the Constitution and adherence to democratic principles underlies all the parties that are currently participating in the GNU. Whether those fundamental principles prove to be stronger as a driving force for maintaining the unity of the GNU over some of the microeconomic differences that exist between the different parties remains to be seen.
Absolutely. You speak about, policy direction, and I imagine the markets are also looking for some kind of policy certainty as the president hopefully puts his final touches to this new cabinet, which he hopefully will announce at any time in the near future. How do you reckon they can get that right? Because as you put it, we've got organizations in this GNU who are, in some instances, pulling quite literally in the opposite direction around whether or not, for example, we should be a government that cares for the people who can't, social welfare, for example, or whether or not we should allow the markets to take over. There's going to be a need to be very clear around where we're headed insofar as this and many other issues are concerned.
I think there is a way of doing it without trying to prove unduly extremist on either side in some of the stances. And I think the players in this GNU are only too aware of the need to cooperate and try and find common ground between the two. And I think there will be an every effort to do so. I think in the short term, I'm less concerned about it than in the longer term when, when you really when push comes to shove and some of those policies have to then be implemented. But at the moment, one senses a spirit of goodwill and an attempt by the various players within the GNU to be determined to make it work. But as I say, only time is going to tell whether they can diffuse some of the tensions over specific microeconomic policies. And in the case of the ANC, of course, the danger is that COSATU and the SACP might decide to break away from the ANC if they don't get their way, and possibly even join the MK. And many would say that that is precisely one of the goals of the MK, to bring about a breakup of the ANC, what is remains of the ANC, and to link up with some of the disgruntled, more left-leaning elements of the ANC to form a far stronger party, MK party, that can then eventually take over the reins of government itself on its own.
Sure. Whenever there's any kind of seminal moment in the country's democratic evolution, be an election or an inauguration, some conversations seem to, keep creeping up. And that's because the problems really stay the same. One of those is around major structural reform so that there's meaningful economic growth. And I suppose if we're able to continue riding this wave, wherever optimism exists in the market, the president will have to show a whole lot more of an intent to finally get that right if we're to sustain the momentum.
Yes, he has to. But, one can already point to some of the successes of one of the key factors that is aligned to this formation of the GNU, and that is the collaboration that we've seen over the last year and a half between the business sector and the presidency on three specific areas, and that is energy supply, logistics, and crime and corruption. And in each of these cases, there is some evidence to suggest that some of this collaboration is starting to bear fruit. The most blatant, obviously, is the end of load shedding for the last 3 months. But you see, what I'm saying is that some of these successes can work towards completely outweighing some of the fears and surrounding things such as minimum wage legislation, BEE. And there are signs that, for example, that the DA is prepared to come down and to compromise and to allow those things, to regard them as of secondary importance compared with some of the more important priorities, the three of which I've mentioned: electricity, logistics, and crime. And in particular, overriding all that, the respect for the Constitution and the pursuit of democratic principles.
Yeah. You did mention initially that, whatever green shoot there is in the market at the moment is a bit muted. But I suppose this next question is still worth asking. Do we expect any of that to have any kind of material difference for ordinary South Africans, many of them cash-strapped, hopeful of some kind of repo rate in the near future, a repo rate cut, that is? Can we kind of make any of that kind of extrapolation yet?
Well, I think you've alluded to the one definite extrapolation that one can make, and that is that the strengthening of the rand by around 4% over the past couple of weeks, if it's sustained for any length of time now, would lead to reduced inflation, and that would make it easier for the Reserve Bank to cut the repo rate sooner than would otherwise have been the case, and that would provide relief to consumers a lot sooner than had been anticipated. So there is already one potential benefit that there is from this delay, from these latest developments for consumers.
All right.
We've also seen a decline in long-term interest rates, which means that the government itself is going to find itself not having to spend quite as much money in funding its expenditure as had been the case. And that again opens the way for it to spend the money that it's not paying in additional interest payments, to spend that money on more vital areas of social delivery.
All right, from your ears to the governor's, or from your lips to the governor's ears, I should say. Dr. Azar Jammine, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. We appreciate your time. Dr. Jammine is the Director and Chief Economist with Econometrix. So we'll keep certainly tracking the markets for you as the story continues to unfold.